I want to talk about the extinction of Big Mama and Grandpa,
Yeah.
right? Um, I know many families are on the one off in regards to what do they call it? Nuclear family? Nuclear
Yeah, the
family?
nuclear family. Yeah.
Nuclear family. It's not where it's at. But
Yeah.
with with the Big Mama and Grandpa vibe, right? It's we were fortunate to grow up
Yeah, very
with
fortunate.
grandma and grandpa, great grandparents actually. But what I notice now is that it's a social aspect and an economic. I want to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
There's a social aspect and economic aspect that seems to have led to the extinction of Big Mama and Grandpa. First, majority have to work, right? That's just the
Yeah.
reality of it, and because they have to work so much, they don't have time to be watching anybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? The next thing is socially though, there seems to be a new ideology about age and the 50, 60, 70 where we were growing up were kind of chill, like, and they kind of, but the 60, 70 now is like they still out there running the streets.
Yeah, yeah.
They want to be seen and they have these like, I don't want to say childish insecurities, but almost like immature insecurities where they want a certain level of attention and they don't have time for other things. Have you observed that?
No. Well, yeah, but see, it's like, what was the function of, or what was the function we thought of having these elders around, especially grandmothers? Because some grandfathers were there, but they weren't as emotionally connected as we thought they should have been.
But they used to kind of give certain little vibes though too, and hold the order,
True.
and give little life
Yes,
lessons.
but not as much like the
not as-
grandmothers was still the center. Part of it again is economic, as you said. People have to work much longer now than they ever did. Well into the 60s or 70s. Another part of it is I think parents just don't appreciate those kind of bonds like they used to, and they're not as necessary. Economically, people can pay for services now that grandparents used to give. The beauty of it, though, I think, if we're going to put this as a model that people should kind of not even strive for or really appreciate, is there was a black painter, Henry Osawa Tanner was his name, like early 19th century painter. He had a painting that I think people should really look at called The Banjo Lesson. It's really a painting, a portrait painting. I don't know if it was actually of grandfather and his grandson, but the grandfather just sitting there with the grandson on his lap, teaching him how to play the banjo. And I think that's kind of the model we have in mind of what we thought or what we hoped these grandparents were doing for their grandchildren. That they were passing on some kind of cultural wisdom, some kind of lesson, some kind of wisdom onto the grandchildren. And I think for some of us who had the benefit of having grandparents around, I don't think, for us at least, our grandparents really sit down and say, it's informal. Informal. The conversations you learn about cultural history, you learn about the past informally. Yeah. I think a lot of that has been lost. But that is tied to our lack of appreciation for history generally in the African American community, which I think is very problematic.
Two things I want to touch on, right? One, it was a gentleman I spoke to, an Italian brethren, and we were talking about cooking, and he was saying that in the American Italian culture, they're losing the recipes, bro, because these kids aren't.
They don't want to cook.
They don't want to cook.
Yeah.
And there's a disconnect between them and the grandparents, and that's a big part of their.
Well,
culture.
let me tell you. All right, so it's not they don't want to cook, but they don't want to eat that stuff either. That's the other part. Yeah.
Right. I see it in the Black American culture. I see it in the Caribbean culture, and since food is such a vehicle to unite people,
was the center of communities.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing now because you can't pay to cater.
No.
And just the cooking and interacting.
They'd say, there we go, right? The conversations that were had, where did this item come from? Or where did this originate? How, what about this technique? Not even the technique they would call it, but how do you do this? The stories that were taught, that were given about where
interaction from being in the presence.
Grandmothers learned the recipe from, or where this originated from. All that stuff is really lost. But again, unfortunately, it comes back to the same thing, the speed of our society. Am I going to sit here and spend 3 hours cooking all day? For what? For 5, 6 people? I'm not going to do that. I don't have time for that. The appreciation for the cuisine itself. And this is a phenomenon that's going on all over the world in terms of cultural knowledge, cultural wisdom not being passed on to the next generation, not because you don't have somebody to pass it on, it's because the younger generation doesn't see the value of learning the techniques, but also hearing those stories anymore because it doesn't make money for many of us. It
Monetized.
can't be monetized. And everything in our society, as you well know, in order to be deemed a success, has to be monetized. So people don't see the value of it anymore. That's the biggest problem.
And there's another aspect of this grandparent thing I want to bring up is that I think people have a distortion about what a parent should be based on TV, especially our generation because we grew up on TV.
Yeah, well now social media is taking that place, which is way worse.
They have a real distortion of like what a grandparent's supposed to be.
Yeah, okay.
And I think TV shows played a big role in people's idea of what a grandparent should be.
Well, I mean, those TV shows got that. I remember the Huxtables, the Cosby Show, the old grandfather who always had a story, all that kind of stuff. There's some truth to that as well. But again, there's a lot of reasons why that kind of model isn't really functional anymore. And again, I think a big reason is not because those persons aren't around, is because younger people don't desire those kind of stories, and they're not kind of forced to have to deal with that too. Like I think previous generations, you had to go to family functions, or you had to listen to what the grandparents said because you were around them all day. You didn't have a choice. Things are different now in terms of
respect for them due to the time you were around them also.
And very basic things like we didn't have a cell phone on us to distract us constantly. Little things like that kind of destroying the dynamics that used to exist. It's causing a big problem too. And one of the things that I think is problematic is that these older persons don't feel appreciated anymore.
So they just cut themselves off.
Well, they cut themselves off because nobody's trying to learn what I know. Nobody wants to hear my stories. People don't want me around, or simple things again. If I come around the grandchildren, they're playing video games the whole time. They're in front of the phone the whole time because we really don't know how to interact with one another like we used to. So it's extremely problematic, and that's why people again go into their own little silos and are isolated oftentimes.